Well, good morning, everybody. It is Monday, April 6th, and we're back for a 10 o'clock devotion. And today is from Chuck Swindoll, An Insight for Living. And it's one called Take Heart. And the reading that he's basing this on is Esther chapter 8, verses 1 through 8. And so I'm going to read that real quick, and then we'll read what Chuck Swindoll has to say. It says, on that day, King Ahasuerus gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her. Then the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. So Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Then Esther spoke again to the king. She fell at his feet, weeping, and pleaded with him to avert the evil design of Haman the Agagite and the plot that he had devised against the Jews. The king held out his golden scepter to Esther, and Esther rose and stood before the king. And she said, if it pleases the king, if I have won his favor, and if the thing seems right before the king, I have his approval. Let an order be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman the Agagite, which he wrote giving orders to destroy the Jews who are all in the province of the king. For how can I bear to see the calamity that is coming to my people? Or how can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred? Then the king said to Queen Esther and to the Jew Mordecai, see, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hung him on the gallows, because he plotted to lay hands on the Jews. You may write as you please with regard to the Jews in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring. For an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked. So real quick, the context of this is Esther finally saving the Jews from destruction by Haman, and Haman's already been hanged and all that stuff. And this is the king giving approval to save the entire Jewish community. And so Pastor Swindoll writes, the king's heart is like mush. It's like soft putty, or we can say like Play-Doh in the hands of the Lord. Just for a moment, imagine another name of that proverb in the place of the king. Somebody who is giving you grief, perhaps. It may be one of your own grown, wayward children. Maybe it's someone who represents a formidable presence. Someone who haunts you and maybe wishes to bring you down. Stubborn person, right? Strong-hearted individual, correct? Imagine that heart, a heart that is so hard, so granite-like, changing into soft putty in the hands of the Lord. It's possible. There is no heart so stubborn that it cannot be breakable in the hands of the Lord. Many years ago, in another place and another time in my life, I went through a dreadful experience with a person who decided to make me his enemy. I still don't know why. It remains a mystery. Nonetheless, it occurred. This individual decided to make my life miserable. He watched my every move. He questioned my decisions. He cast doubt on my ministry. This person applied pressure, sometimes to the point where I thought I would scream. I don't know how much he said to others. I never asked. But he said enough to me and was bullying and intimidating enough that I became frightened, especially when I realized he carried a gun. Eventually, on one occasion, he threatened me with it. One bitter cold Sunday after church, I went home and fell across our bed, not even taking off my overcoat. And I cried to the Lord. I wept audibly until I could not cry another tear. I had come to my wit's end. I was exhausted, trying everything I knew to do to bring about a change, and nothing changed. This man had a heart like the king in our story. There is no wall so strong that the Almighty God is not stronger still. There is no will so stubborn that he is not able to soften it. If the king can change the heart, or if God can change the heart of the king, he can change any heart. Any heart. Read that again. You who live your days intimidated and threatened, anxious over the falling of the next shoe, listen to this counsel. God is able to take the heart of anyone and change it, just as he did with the heart of his king. Yes, anyone. And I empathize with this story from Pastor Swindoll, because any minister throughout his time in ministry has people who are kind of against him and kind of say bad things about him and try to intimidate him. But as I look at this story, I can't help but think of like Paul. in the book of Acts, or Saul at the time. And here he was, this hard-hearted guy who was going out to arrest, and actually had the legal right to go and do this, arrest the Jews out in Damascus. And on that road, his heart was softened and his heart was changed. And I think about Pharaoh and the Egyptians and how hard his heart was, and how God eventually changed and softened his heart. And so, I mean, even in my own life, there are moments when I have a hard heart and I'm stubborn, as most of you probably know that. I like to think that's for a good reason, but maybe not always. And we all have those times and places in our lives where we're just hard-hearted, we're stubborn, and we can't or don't want to change the way that we are doing things. But we hear in this story from Esther about this king who was just ready to kill all the Jews in his community. And he had people behind him. And then he had Esther, who was his queen, who had come from the Jewish community and was begging him at times throughout the entire story to stop and to not let these Jews be decimated. And eventually the king's hard heart was softened because he realized that God was with Esther and that God had melted his heart and made it like Play-Doh, as he says, and allowed the Jewish community to live. So fear not those who feel intimidated or threatened or whatever, that God can soften those hearts. God has softened our hearts, all of us, for many various reasons, but God can soften our hearts. God can make us realize that's just not the way that we want to live. We want to live with a caring and loving heart, and not one that is bitter and full of resentment. So go out this day with a soft heart. Go out this day and be like this king, and let that hard heart just kind of melt like the Grinch's heart melted and grew 3 sizes, or whatever, however the story goes. It melted because he's seen the presence of God. Go forth this day into peace and the love of Christ. Amen.